It is my greatest pleasure to welcome now the keynote speaker of our conference on the long 19th century, Sarah Gould. Sarah is assistant professor maître de conférence at Université Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne, where she focuses on the study of British art. In 2016, Sarah completed her PhD at Paris 7 with a dissertation on making textual method and the materiality of British painting in the long 19th century. Since then, she has published extensively on William Turner, among others. In my opinion, her work is truly notable for its equally precise and original approach to questions of material and technique. In 2024, Sarah also published, for instance, a great article on Thomas Gainsborough's eccentric paintings and the painting technique, often qualified as being careless. Sarah is currently working on 2 monographs, finishing a book on the Victorian painter Millet, and the other one on pollution in and of painting and visual culture in 19th century Britain, which I assume she will also give us an insight into this evening. Tonight, Sarah will speak about the Smoky canvas pollution and paint in 19th century British art. Sarah, we look very much forward to your talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm going to say a few words in German. Ich muss Lea Kühn für diese Einladung bedanken. Ich bin sehr dankbar und ich freue mich wirklich, vor Doktoranden zu sprechen. Aber jetzt werde ich zu Englisch verstellen. Weil mein Deutsch sehr eingerostet ist. So this talk, as you said, Leah, forms a segment of the book I'm currently working on, which is on pollution, the pollution in and of 19th century British paintings. In this talk, I wanted to talk about British art, but I'm mostly going to focus on Turner. But as you'll see, I hope that this talk will show my methodology, and I've included works by other artists that we can discuss at the end if you want, and if you're too tired to ask questions. So, when we think of an artist that captures steam-powered modernity, Turner is far off the list. We see his steam train rushing towards us, his steamship belching smoke, and in his work we witness how fossil capital reshaped landscapes, physically altering infrastructures and the environment. These transformations have been the focus of many studies on Turner, hailed by Michel Serres as the first genius of thermodynamics. Yet, when we examine Turner, but also other artists, other British artists and artists from the 19th century, through the lens of ecology, one crucial question, the question of polluted air, has long eluded visual studies. And when polluted air does become the focus of studies on Turner's work, the questions that often arise are his polluted landscapes celebrations of progress or critiques, and allow him to free his brushwork? One line of inquiry is moral and ethical, while the other is more internal to the trajectory of art history, and specifically to the modernist interpretation of Turner's works. What I'm trying to do in my research and in this talk today is to bypass these questions. One way to do so is by shifting the focus to polluted air, a subject that surprisingly has only gained attention in environmental historical studies over the past 15 years. This means thinking not just about industrialization, nor merely identifying Turner's stance on pollution or what it allowed him to do, but rather taking air itself seriously, historicizing the very idea of air. What was in Turner's and other painters' lungs? Polluted air has a history. One can say that Turner had been breathing the air of classicism, yet more literally, what was the air he was breathing? My interest as an art historian in the nexus between art and the environment, especially in the complex concept of pollution, is obviously driven by the urgent concerns of our present time and a heightened awareness of the political and aesthetic dimensions of the air we breathe. The significance of this exploration becomes apparent when considering experiences like the initially underestimated airborne transmission of COVID-19 and the adoption of visual strategies to indicate areas of potential air contamination. This recognition of air's political and aesthetic importance has spurred the development of a new sub-discipline within the humanities termed atmospheric studies. This contemporary context urges a re-evaluation of the 19th century, prompting us to interrogate how have artists depicted pollution, and can we historicize the polluted atmospheres of their paintings? But also, how do artworks both materialize and contribute to their environmental condition? If you search pollution and Turner online, you'll likely encounter a recent study. In June 2023, a widely publicized study by two Harvard climate scientists attracted headlines by presenting what was portrayed as a groundbreaking revelation. In their latest findings, the two scientists demonstrated the profound influence of 19th century air pollution on Turner's and Claude Monet's creative processes. Their research shed light on how changes in the painter's styles, characterized by hazier contours and a predominantly paler color palette, aligned seamlessly with the optical effects from heightened atmospheric aerosol concentrations. In doing so, the researchers provided a scientific validation, a validation that these 19th century painters had effectively captured elements of the atmospheric environmental transformation of their time. From an art historical point of view, however, this study had two notable limitations. First, it mislabeled Turner as an impressionist, which is an inadequate classification. And second, and perhaps most importantly, I think, it essentially confirmed what art historians had long demonstrated. As someone who witnessed the transition from sail to steam, Turner was one of the first artists to systematically capture the diverse and elusive aspects of anthropogenic, that is, man-made pollution. As early as the 1810s, he vividly depicted urban landscapes. And from this time on, he increasingly included steamships in his paintings. They became a recurring motif. His unique and iconic oil painting of a steam train is the most famous work of Turner's engagement with the industrial landscape. It's a work that has now become an icon of the Industrial Revolution, making the complex welter of historical causalities into view as an event. Yet, as a form of representation, an icon does not only represent an absent object, it does work through its presence, it acts. So today, I aim to demonstrate that 19th century paintings of steam are not simply representations, but agents and mediators of environmental change. Philippe-Jacques de Loutherbourg's Colebrooke-Dale by Night, painted at the dawn of the new century, during the height of the first industrial revolution, or during the height of industrialization in Great Britain, captures the genesis of the mining and metallurgical industry. It documents the paradigm shift in energy production that Gould initiated. The painting depicts the Bedlam furnaces at Colebrooke-Dale, Shropshire, near Birmingham, where flames and smoke illuminate the scene with a theatrical glow, highlighting tiny figures bustling to transport materials, epitomizing the rapid pace of industrial advancement in a hellish, demonic atmosphere. A sublime representation, it encapsulates the sense of both awe and dread that characterized the early industrial era. The Loutherbourg scene is based on sketches made during his travels in 1786 and 1800, sketches that were later acquired by Turner, an admirer of the Loutherbourg. As early as 1795, Turner was also exploring industrial landscapes, as in Landsteffen Castle by moonlight, where the smoke from a burning kiln leads the eye into a picturesque landscape, and out of it by erasure. Sorry, that's the work. By erasure, that is, by intentionally blending the lines between graphite and watercolor stains and smoke. These works by de Loutherbourg and Turner are geographically situated, as their titles suggest, and circumscribe the source of pollution to one origin. These artworks evoke a period when polluted air was widespread through pollution, when polluted air was widespread, but pollution was relatively limited. Historians characterize this era as one of precarious balance, meaning that the cumulative impact of air pollution, water pollution, or untreated sewage often led to severe environmental balances. However, polluted air and water were less pervasive, partly due to the environment's natural self-purification, but also to regulatory practices towards pollution and stringent measures that situated polluting industries outside of urban centers. I'm going to give you an example. For instance, if a neighboring dyer or a tannery polluted your river, you could call the authorities. And as early, for example, as 1586, Queen Elizabeth I herself complained about the intrusion of sea coal smoke into her beer and refused to return to London when the air was too thick with smoke. Later, in 1637, during King Charles I's reign, the brewers of Westminster were officially banned from using coal in the brewing process. That is to say, pollution was highly regulated, much more than it is today. In Great Britain, the coal steam system began to replace hydraulic and animal-powered mechanisms as early as in the mid-18th century. Until the 16th century, coal mining had been rather minimal in Britain compared to China, for example. And this was primarily due to the abundance of forests and concerns about coal's sulfuric smell. That is the idea that the smell of coal was harmful to health, according to a theory of miasma, so neo-Hippocratic medicine. So the belief that it was bad for the health, but not for the right scientific reasons that we know of today. However, in the 17th century, massive deforestation in Great Britain led to a wood shortage, which then saw becoming increasingly exploited energies. In Leeds, Turner, Leeds, a city that was known for its milling industry, is here shrouded in household chimneys and industrial smoke. Here we witness what I think is a transition. Accumulating across the composition, chimneys rise in repetition. Their sheer multiplicity makes it difficult to distinguish one source of pollution from another. On the right, in the watercolor wash, polluted air erases the view. A lack of visibility that, I argue, materializes the shift from what historians François Jarige and Thomas Leroux in their book, The Contamination of the Earth, which is the first global synthesis on air pollution over 300 years, what they have termed the old regime of pollution. So it's a transition from the old regime of pollution to the new one that persists today. This dissolution, characteristic of both watercolor paint and pollution itself, blinds us. It is pollution that abstracts, mirroring the broader discourses surrounding its perception and control at the time. This very work, I argue, presents and materializes how the very notion of pollution itself was formulated by 19th century chemists and industrialists as something profoundly nebulous, thereby simulating, dissolving, and diluting the responsibility of polluters both in Britain and in its colonies. This vista, in many ways, in 1816 was an anomaly, unlike any other city outside of Britain. Turner's compositional choices and vantage points informs the directionality of the gaze. The direction in which the viewer's eyes is guided seems to invert the traditional hierarchy between foreground and background, further emphasized by Turner's effacement of faces. In the foreground, tracks pull the viewer's eye into the watercolor, guiding it further along the waterways that structure the city. Within these tracks, we see traces of an earlier energy regime, biomass, animal and man-powered organic energy. It's a form of hybrid modernity. Indeed, such a work invites us to challenge the dominant narrative of energy transitions as linear replacements. As Jean-Baptiste Pressos argues, the idea that one energy regime simply replaced another is a fantasy. His book, More and More and More, An All-Consuming History of Energy, which was recently translated in English, underscores the persistence of multiplication of energy sources rather than their sequential replacement. In view of London from Greenwich, Turner captures the industrial city enveloped in clouds of smoke and steam, produced here by steamships transporting sea coal along the waterways. Sea coal shipped from Newcastle that supplied in many parts of Britain. In this work, we view the scene from a distance, positioned beyond the turbulent clouds that Turner would later use to immerse his viewers. Yet the numerous chimneys billowing smoke obscure the distinctions between individual sources of pollution. In many of Turner's later works, we navigate different boundaries between steam, smoke, and fog as Turner blurs the line between anthropogenic influences and natural phenomena, but also between smoke and medium, between the represented and the representation itself. In Staffbach, Fingal's Cave, Turner's first oil painting to cross the Atlantic, a steamboat battles a storm, its smoke merging with the surrounding mist and sea spray. This fusion, emblematic of polluted fog, is embraced by Turner. The vibrant and diverse texture of the painting amplifies the mist's effect, softening lines and contours, illustrating the artist's mastery in capturing the indistinct boundaries between the natural and the industrial. What we witness here, I argue, and this is, I think, the most important thing that I'm trying to show, is the naturalization of pollution, a phenomenon that was later encapsulated by the very concept of smog, coined by physicist Henri-Antoine Deveux in 1905 to describe this mix of fog and smoke. In my research, I try to show that the indeterminacy characteristic of Turner's work is rooted in the emergence of pollution as it was defined in the 19th century and as we still define it today, from the works of de Loutherbourg and Turner in the 1790s to those of Turner in the 1820s and after. We witness the transition from the concept of nuisance to the concept of pollution. That is, from something that is situated, that can be clearly seen, that can be and therefore clearly punished, to something that is much more nebulous and therefore less punishable. François Jarich and Thomas Leroux explained that the proliferation of production sites and the intensification of activities that characterize the emergence of industrial or fossil capitalism led to change in the nature and scale of pollution. So from nuisances, such as nuisances by tanneries and dye works, which could be controlled, repressed, and regulated, to the concept of pollution that we use today, which is much more elusive and therefore less easily punished. This change transitioned towards a form of pollution as we recognize it today, which due to its scale and complexity, because pollution is a hyper-object, is less easily defined, conceptualized, and consequently less readily subject to punishment and regulation. This transition, I think, is crucial. Pollution moved from being a legal concept to a scientific one, which in turn allowed industries to escape the consequences of their action. And I believe that in Turner's works, we witness this paradigmatic shift. Turner's subjects, without clear contours or limits, have led art historians to consider some of his works as protomodernist or abstract avant-l'heure. And here I'm showing you the exhibition, the late Turner exhibition that took place at MoMA in the 60s that showcased Turner's works alongside Rothko's. An exhibition I would have loved to have seen, but which nonetheless has perpetuated this modernist interpretation of Turner's works. The scientific study mentioned in my introduction classified Turner as an impressionist, suggesting that his engagement with pollution had facilitated a freeing of his brushwork. But this perspective implies a causative link between his portrayal of atmospheric pollution and the disintegration of form, a reading that, to me, seems overly formalist, but that doesn't bother me, but rather mostly embedded in an abstract understanding of air and pollution. Rather, what I want to show is that considering Turner's representations of steam as proto-abstracts, assumes a metaphorical definition of a form that loses sight of its historical determinisms. In my research, I tried to add more dialectical nuance to this view by re-examining the historical context in which these works were produced. It seems to me that Turner strove to represent subjects whose limits, whose boundaries were unclear. And he did this through his choice of subject matter and through his technique. So the move I'm making is to consider how pollution is both represented and materialized in his paintings. So now you might wonder, but how did Turner position himself amidst these transformations? And do his artworks act as a form of resistance to these technological advancements and shifts? Turner's enduring relationship with steam has been and continues to pose an intriguing paradox to scholars. In his works, it serves both as a powerful symbol of captivating progress and potentially destructive modernity. It remains a challenge. It remains challenging to pinpoint where Turner stands and sympathies stand concerning the issues of his time. Were his pictures of social and technological change elegies for a vanishing past or celebration of the new, or both, as the curators of a recent Turner exhibition at Tate? Yeah, I'm not going to talk about them. To understand this, it's essential to explore the historical significance of the rise of coal in Britain. Coal symbolized the zenith of British power during Victorian industrialization. This is particularly evident in the display of the Great Exhibition of 1851, a moment of dream and pride for the British nation. Coal dubbed, so this is not a nut, but this is actually a big block of coal. Coal dubbed the Black Diamond was celebrated as a positive force. It's of course very different from today, where coal is the epitome of dirty energy, right? We speak about the carbon footprint. The Great Exhibition in particular, but also other exhibitions featured this massive block of coal at the entrance. And it was a way of symbolizing British dominance over the rest of the world, of course, to materialize it. You can see here also blocks of limestone, pillars of coals, slabs of slate. By the mid-19th century, coal had become the dominant energy source in Britain, contributing significantly to the country's carbon dioxide emissions and marking it as the birthplace of what we recognize as air pollution. By 1840, Britain's coal production reached 30 million tons, dwarfing the output of the German states, which was 3 million, France 4 million, and the United States 3 million. And meaning that from 1800 to 1850, Britain was responsible for nearly half of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. If we go back to snowstorm, steamboat of the harbor's mouth, Turner breaks from conventional modes of representation to adopt an approach where the awareness of the surface prevails, giving the work a sculptural depth. The absence of a horizon line and Turner's technique amplify the chaos and create a vortex, a tumult of matter, foam spray, and smoke at the center of the work. Here, Turner depicts what remains, the debris marginalized by the centrifugal force of the Industrial Revolution. And I believe that such a work offers a negative to the dynamic of control and sanitization that characterizes industrial capitalism. It materially and aesthetically embodies the ambiguity that lies in how pollution was perceived and regulated at the time. The escalation of industrial pollution during the 19th century prompted various protests and legal actions, notably among doctors who were increasingly concerned with the damaging effects of pollution on people's health. However, it was also in the beginning of the 19th century that chemistry and industry began to safeguard industrial capitalism by demonstrating not only that steam was a symbol of heat and comfort, but also that sulfur dioxide could act as an air disinfectant or purifier. From the 1820s, with the advent of industrial chemistry, the toxicity of pollution became increasingly ambiguous and dubious, with chemists claiming that acid gases were actually beneficial to health. People in France, like Chaptal, for example. That's while the advent of modern pollution saw a decrease in punitive measures and to an extent control, it also became more measurable through the advent of filters, technological advancements, norms, and thresholds. And ironically, these improvements intended to mitigate pollution contributed to its increase. The historian of sensibilities, Alain Corbin, has shown that as outdoors became less and less tolerated, pollution increased. In wreckers, the debris, the flotsam and jetsam emerged from the sea as emblematic of the things, the stuff, the people that were being marginalized by the industrializing process. And in many of Turner's seascapes, we moreover witness fishermen being pushed aside by tourism, like here in this watercolor. Turner's steam indeed often appears as a byproduct of a sanitizing and controlling process. As Andreas Malm has argued in Fossil Capital, the prevalent view of steam as an efficient and cost-effective energy source is fundamentally flawed. Instead, steam offered mill owners a greater control over subordinate labor, leading Malm to argue that the development of fossil fuel industry in the early 19th century was an outcome of class struggle. This dynamic comes to the fore in Turner's watercolor Dudley Worcester. Set in the Midlands, in central England, an area that was colloquially referred to as the Black Country due to its heavy industrialization, leading to environmental degradation, including acid rain, which actually led to a significant increase in mortality rate. Here, the faces and bodies of the workers vanish, as in many works by Turner that had the tendency of erasing people's faces and bodies, overwhelmed by the oppressive weight of industrial fumes. It is what Michel Foucault defined as the origin of la biopolitique, that he defines as a form of power that focuses not only on the life of territories, but also on the life of populations, bodies, and the environment. Turner's works show us in the image of these traces, he represents what remains, what is being pushed to the margins, and what is undergoing the process of purification. The traces he left on the canvas, Turner is well known for his impastoed works, are tangible embodiments of these discarded subjects. In his works, waste such as atmospheric pollution serves as a trace that simultaneously functions as material evidence of its making, but also of what it stands for. So from an environmental perspective, Turner's works reveal a profound ambivalence, a simultaneous attraction and apprehension as the viewers are drawn in by the very forces that possess the capacity to obliterate. How then can we grapple with the challenge of aligning Turner's innovative style with his profound engagement with a tangible material world without resorting to a causal explanation, i.e., it is because of changes in the atmosphere that Turner liberated his brush. And this is a shorter and last section of my talk. Upon his death, Turner's collection, bequeathed to the nation, was found in disrepair in his Queen Anne Street Gallery. In 1853, the Select Committee of the Gallery reported, I quote, "After 30 years in Mr. Turner's wretched gallery, the dirt hung over it like dirt from the smoke of a chimney." And like many 19th century paintings that adorn homes heated by coal, Turner's paintings intrinsically incorporated waste materials. His paintings had then to be routinely cleaned by using a silk cloth to combat the lackluster appearance due to accumulation of polluted substances. In 1850, a select committee investigation highlighted the National Gallery's poor condition, exacerbated by complaints since 1839 about the heat and foulness of the rooms. A government commission, including Charles Eastlake, W.S. Russell, and that's important, I'll come back to it later, Michael Faraday, was established to investigate. They attributed the dirt accumulation on paintings to the gallery's location near smoke-emitting chimneys and high visitor traffic. Their recommendations included encapsulating paintings in shadow boxes and protecting them with glass and tinfoil to prevent dust and pollutants from deposition. The National Gallery remains located at the intersection of Charing Cross and Trafalgar Square, positioned between the affluent neighbourhoods of the West End and at the time the less privileged areas to the east. The committee also suggested relocating west to South Kensington to mitigate pollution, although this didn't happen, as you know. In conservation science, this report marks a significant milestone. It advocated for a systematic policy of using glass to protect artworks from pollution. And it's important to note that continental experts at the time, who were not as confronted with atmospheric pollution, strongly opposed these measures. There is a parallel here with how scientists such as Faraday, who also tried to solve river pollution by measuring quantities of toxic products, defining thresholds of acceptability in terms of dose, etc. There is a parallel between his role in establishing different measurements and his role in this, this select committee. Maybe I'll go back to it later because that's the whole idea that I have in my book. But I just had another idea because that's the beginning of glass protection from paintings, and I found it ironic, right, that now activists throw food at paintings that are protected by glass, by this technological this layer of protection, and that this protective measure was implemented to protect the paintings from pollution. There's a historical irony in this, but we can talk about it later. But going deeper, one can examine how paintings carry pollution preserved within the artwork. Can traces of coal, wood, or tobacco be detected through techniques such as sectioning and ultraviolet imaging? Conservators such as Sarah Cove have shown that artists like Constable deliberately lighten their canvases to counteract the darkening effects of pollution. And actually, if you go to the Neue Pinakothek collection that is in the Alto Pinakothek, you have a painting by Constable, which is Dedhamville near East Bergholt, and it has these light touches of white that were called Constable snow that he would use to counteract pollution. So this is really bad. Slide. So Whistler also often allowed his nocturnes to dry in the sun before adding bright touches. And this method, combined with the use of thin layers of paint that become increasingly transparent on a dark background, contributed to the gradual darkening of the canvases over time. visually capturing the polluted atmosphere. In his works, pollution becomes an intrinsic part of the painting, and the painting itself seems to turn into pollution. The fluidity of the chosen medium embodies modernity, symbolizing both the industrial gesture and the aesthetic language associated with it. Unlike Turner, Whistler was less concerned with capturing reality in its most precise nuances than with creating artificial worlds endowed with their own echoes and resonances. An eco-materialist perspective encourages us to explore how Turner's, Whistler's, or Monet's artworks extend beyond their immediate presence, encompassing broad spatial and temporal dimensions from extraction to transportation and pollution. This approach considers the narratives of the materials embedded in the artworks themselves. Take Indian yellow, for example, a color derived from the concentrated urine of cows fed exclusively on mango leaves in rural India, produced under exploitative conditions and meshed in extractive imperialism. Take ultramarine, sourced from lapis lazuli mines in Afghanistan, manned by slaves, representing the intricate web of global extraction processes. These examples highlight Turner's palette as a site of multiple and global extractions, emphasizing the complex intersection between art, materiality, and the socio-economic conditions that underpin the production of his materials. And if you can bear with me before my conclusion, I just have one anecdote that I often tell my students in my material matters class, which is that when I was a kid, my mother bought me this green sweater. It was the color of the sweater was vert de chrome, so chrome green. And I got these rashes each time I would wear the sweater. And I would wear woolen sweaters all the time. So we didn't really know why I had these rashes with this sweater. And it turned out, I mean, I was told at the time that I was actually allergic to this color. I was allergic to the vert de chrome. And at the time, I really didn't understand how one could be allergic to a color. But now I understand because, of course, colors come from extracted materials, and colors are not just images, but are also, materials. So 19th century paintings appear as both tangible artifacts of their time and symbolic narratives of what they embody. From this perspective, which shifts focus from what these paintings represents to what they are, there's no rigid distinction between form and substance. It encourages us to contemplate the pollution of the paintings rather than depicted by them. Through an eco-critical lens, we are invited to consider how 19th century paintings are deeply intertwined with their environmental context. The comprehension of atmospheric pollution encompasses more than just an analysis of production regimes and their transformations. It also involves delving into the realms of aesthetics. Critical approaches in art history, rather than anachronistically recast 19th century artists as ecologists, allow us to both historicize their works within their environmental milieu and to illuminate their ongoing pertinence in contemporary discussions of the climate crisis. It would be wrong to say that Turner's works don't tend towards abstraction, or his late works at least, since to our contemporary eye, they often do. We cannot not see it, i.e. a departure from visual reality through the dissolution, the dilution of form. Yet rather, what I want to consider is what the systematic association of atmospheric pollution with abstraction in art suggests. It's a discourse that is deeply intertwined with the way the concept of pollution itself has being formulated to describe something nebulous, far more indistinct than a mere nuisance, and therefore less accountable. Behind this is the idea of dilution, both of pollution and of paint. And in the very concept of pollution, in the first half of the 19th century, there was the idea of pollution's boundless propensity to spread into vast environments, such as rivers and the atmosphere. How artists have both participated in and played against this discourse of industrial capitalism's strategy of dilution as a means of evading responsibility is what I'm interested in. The focus becomes not on merely observing the impact of atmospheric pollution on 19th century artworks, but understanding how these substances are intrinsically woven into the fabric of these creations, underscoring the role of art as both a document and historical environmental conditions, historical environmental conditions, and an active participant in these conditions. Where does the story go from here? How can we situate Turner's polluted atmospheres within their own environment? How might we look at his painting in relation to air in particular? And how did the causal relationships between pollution, visuality, and painting came to be diagrammed in the 19th century? These are the questions that I hope my presentation has raised today. Thank you.
Thank you so very much again, Sarah, for your great talk.